It's Pond Boys Angling Adventures, the traveling multi-species fishing show. Today's episode will be sponsored by Mythic Gear Dry Suits. Now, for those of you that are kayakers and you fish, and not just regular kayakers, fishing kayakers, a lot of times you think, oh, I'm safe, water's not very deep, or it's just a lake, I know how to swim. But late in the fall, early in the spring, those water temperatures are so cold that hypothermia and a mixture of other horrible things can happen to you in a very short amount of time. The difference between a dry suit and a wetsuit is a wetsuit, keeps your body warmer, but you're still getting wet. Dry suit completely seals your body off from the water. They're made of rubber gaskets. They have the zippers have gaskets around them. Their neck has a gasket. Your wrists have gaskets. Now, dry suits can be really, really expensive. But Mythic Gear, as its tagline says, truly is a dry suit for the masses. You can get one for a third of the price of the competitors, and it's affordable for anybody, especially for you guys that are out there on Lake Michigan. Or just after ice off or just before ice on, they are the dry suit for you. So episode 3 or 4, I forgot which one, I'm getting tired. It's been a long week. We were talking about basic fishing. And I think we kind of got, just the basic rigs and how to go for your basic fish simply covered. So I want to talk about something new and fun. And I wanted to talk about carp. Now, carp are still frowned upon by many anglers here in the U.S., and that's because for years, they're considered as a trash fish, and they hurt all the other fish. But after all these years, we still have all those other fish, and the carp aren't going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. Guys used to bank everything or kill everything they caught in mid-'80s, '90s, and it didn't make a lick of difference. It just didn't. And guys used to despise carp. Now, growing up, there was only one pond within riding distance, bike riding distance. And I had carp and bullheads, so I carp fished. Anytime I wasn't in sports or wasn't hanging out with my buddies, I was at that pond. It was called Mill Pond, and I lived there. And I used to take some of my bigger fish. I could actually freeze them whole, and my dad would sell them to the guys at work, and they would give me money for more bait, which was at that time. And like we said in our last episode, corn and bread. Corn and bread are your two easiest things to carp fish with. The bread, to be specific, you want a very soft white bread. Now, there used to be a Wonder Bread from Hostess. They don't make it anymore, but it was the softest white bread I could find. It was beautiful. But any other premium white bread, and not even premium white bread, Walmart's white bread is fine. Basically what you're doing is you're not using the crust. You're going to use the white part. You got to keep your bag sealed. You got to keep it fresh. Once it starts to dry, it will not work. You take a little piece of the white bread and you knead it around your hook. I usually try to make sure that my point is just barely sticking out, or I can at least see it. And then you make it in a pear shape around the hook. Your hook does not have to be big. A number 6 or 4 octopus hook will work great. Raven makes they were a sponsor of ours. They make a hook called a specialist hook that works nicely, and of course there's carp hooks, which I've just started to use. I use barbless carp hooks, and I am ecstatic about the way they work. Thank you, JC from JC's Castaway. So that's what you do with bread. If it's nice and calm out, or just after rain and it's calm out, carp have excellent vision, very, very good vision. So you want to be able to, a lot of times you're going to have to stalk them if you're going to do the whole bread on the float thing. But you can see them stirring up the mud, or you see clouds, like mud clouds from them, or bubbles coming up from where they're at. And I use a long rod because it helps you do this. You want to sneak up from a distance. And you can throw a few pieces of the crust, because you're not going to use the crust. Rip off all the crust, break in pieces, and throw it out along the shore, out where you think they are. And then you can at times will come up and hit it. And you can get them with a fly rod, or you can use this method that I used ever since I was a kid. So you can sneak up from a distance, crouch down so they can't see you. Fish a foot, maybe 2 foot tops down. If they're close to shore, you're going to cast past them. Let it settle and slowly reel it in, not to disturb them. right into where they're feeding, sit and wait, and they'll explode on it. It is a blast. It's awesome. My nemesis, the grass carp, which we'll talk about in another, that's a whole nother episode in itself. But I had a real hard time catching them, but 2 out of the 4 I think I've hooked now were both on, they were coming up, and I threw some bread out. They went up for the bread, slipped them a Mickey, and hi-ho, I'm fighting for one of the best fights of my life. Carp, corn, same thing. You can use, you want a thick gauge hook, because if you get into a carp that's, anything over, 17 inches, it has some major pulling power, and you want a thicker gauge hook. So this isn't the time for the old school thin, long shanks or Aberdeens or anything like that. They'll bend those right out. I've had them bend even Gamakatsu octopus hooks on me. It's another reason why I like the carp hooks, but your standard octopus hook will work for carp. For corn, what you do is you take the bigger kernels, and you thread them up 3 or 4 above the hook, and then you fill up the hook. And you want to use a small hook like a size 6, size 4. The bigger ones, they can notice a larger hook. Carp, one trick for corn that I've used is at all your grocery stores, they sell extracts, different flavored extracts. Maple syrup, coconut, raspberry, strawberry, orange, root beer, caramel, banana. They got probably at least 20 or 30 of them at average grocery store. I've used several. My 2 favorites are banana extract and caramel extract. So I opened my can of corn a couple nights before. I drain all the crap out of the can. I put them in a nice freezer Ziploc, something thick. I pour in the extract. I lay it flat in the fridge, and I just let them soak it up. You can tell with the caramel or root beer or any of the darker extracts that the corn soaks it up, because you can actually see the bottom of the kernels, the thinner part of the kernels turn brown. So it works. And I've caught more on flavored corn than I have on non-flavored corn, but it's not a must. If you're going to get fancy, they sell fake corn. I got some overseas that was supposed to float, and it doesn't, but there is floating corn. Why floating corn? Well, if you're fishing off the bottom, or say you're just using your float for a strike indicator and you're fishing off the bottom, and say you have like a 2-foot leader, you can have your corn rise up over, say there's a foot of weeds. You set it for 1.5 feet, and your corn's popped up above the top of the weeds, easier for the carp to find. So they sell fake corn, which you can use that floats and doesn't float, and floating is to get it off the bottom. One trick I just recently learned from a Chicago area guy, and also a guy named Josh Bennett, who's an excellent carp fisherman. You can take a dollar store yellow pair of flip-flops, get a piece of corn, you can cut the foam to the size of a piece of corn. Now, I have never had a carp actually swallow the foam. It's so tough on there, they haven't been able to pull it off. Usually it's the first one I put on there, then I'll load up the corn. It does the same thing as the pop-up corn. It'll raise your bait off the ground. But I was worried about them eating it, but so far I have not had a carp eat it yet. So, carp, you can obviously use a float, all right, corn, bread, all right, and then we talked about bottom rigs, your basic sleep slicker rig, where you have a running rig where the carp can take the bait, they can run it, and the line moves through the weight, they don't feel the weight, you set the hook. There's also a theory from a carp fisherman, opposing theories, that if you use a very heavy weight, like a big fat carp weight, like ounce, 2 ounces, and you set it up right, that the carp, the weight of the hook, they don't need to feel it. They hit it, and the weight of the hook will set the hook itself. And I've seen major debates on which one's better and which one's not. I like the running rig only because I fish rivers a lot, and it's a lot easier for me to lay my rod out in front of me, have them take some line, and I don't have as many problems with snags. But I am very interested in the heavier weight theory. I think that's pretty cool. Also for carp fishing, in Europe, they're bass fishing. There's just as many rigs as there is bass lures. The tournaments are just as prestigious. The same amount of money is spent on the industry. It's crazy. Let's talk about some other bass baits you can quickly make at home. Not bass baits, carp baits that you can quickly make at home that are not carp or corn. All right, the first one would be your basics, big Wheaties. It's gone. Guys have used it for carp bait for a while. Some guys just take Wheaties and they add some water and they smash it together. For me that was okay, but what I would do is I would take, Wheaties, maybe a little bit of flour or breadcrumbs. I would add like vanilla extract to it, a little bit of sugar to it. You can add garlic to it. And what I'll do is, instead of having the big giant flakes and crushing it with my hand, I'll put it into a bag and take one of those meat hammers and I'll crush it into a powder. I get a much more consistent dough. And you don't want it so thin that the water will wash it off, but you don't want it so thick that you can't bend it and put it into a shape that's fishable. The second one would be, like a strawberry bait. Guys have used strawberry flavored baits for carp for a long time. And Jellos will work, Kool-Aids work. Basically, you just take, like 6 pieces of, you can use all flour. I use a food processor, so I'll use like 6 pieces of bread, a cup of flour, some sugar, packet of, strawberry Kool-Aid or strawberry Jello. You mix that up to consistency. If it gets too thin, you add some flour, or I'll either add. I always have oats and Wheaties on the side, so if my dough baits aren't thick enough, I'll add crushed oats or crushed Wheaties to help with the consistency. But it's just and you just add strawberry mix and some sort of strawberry mix. I usually add sugar or or vanilla, and you don't need treble hooks. A lot of guys say, "Oh, I gotta have treble hooks." You absolutely do not need treble hooks. No, you can, if your consistency is right. You just same thing. A number 4, number 6 octopus hook will work all day long. You get all these bass guys that say, "Oh, I don't, bass are so much better, and carp are trash. They're not worth anything." Well, let me tell you, I've fished both my entire life, and bass are awesome. We'll have show after show about them. They're awesome. You stock them. They're acrobatic. They're fairly strong. You get to use all these different lures and to trick them and stuff. But carp just simply fight better. Maybe better's not the word, but harder for sure is the word. These carp, when I hook into them, they usually take one giant screaming run. And in the river with that current behind them, I use 10-pound tests. I use 8/6 float and fly rod. You could use a steelhead rod. I like the float and fly rod, so if I get a smaller catfish or something, I can still feel them, but it's still long enough for me to handle the carp. But they'll take a run and they'll just scream like half of your spool off. It is nuts. It's just beautiful sound, and then they'll come back and forth and they're just bulldogging. The amount of strength is incredible. And I've had 3 or 4 guys that I know that said, "Oh, I'm not carp fishing. I'm not fishing for those trash fish. I'm not doing that." And they go with me and I get them on some good carp, and they're like, I had no idea. I had no idea that they're this strong, they're this much fun, that they're that smart. And they are really smart, and that eyesight of theirs is really tricky. You really got to sneak up on them. What's nice about the river is the water's so dirty, and there's all these bugs on the surface, and they're so busy eating, you can get a little bit closer than you can. It's like stalking them in lakes. That's fly fishing for carp has been big in Europe for a long time. It's getting more and more popular in the United States just because of that fact, because they see so well, almost like a bonefish. They're America's bonefish. Freshwater bonefish or whatever. You can get them in big flat areas. You got to stalk them. They can see you real well. They're incredibly strong. And if you haven't carp fished, especially, you need to give it a shot. I did a video a while back on my YouTube channel. I was talking about how, most of these corporate ponds and suburban ponds around Chicago have carp in them, and they're probably the same around your houses as well. Most of these lakes and ponds have carp in them. Now, are they all big? No. But some of them have tons of carp in there, and nobody fishes for them. So I picked a random corporate pond, and I brought my carp stuff there, and, we had, the first day I went by myself, I think I got 4 or 5. I chummed the night before. It wasn't too far. I was like 15 minutes from my house, so I drove the night before. I threw out chum. Chum, in case you don't know, it's bait that you throw out to attract fish. There's all different kinds for carp, but you can just take a couple cans of corn, and throw it out there the night before, and basically you just want to pull fish in.